welcome to Intriguing Beings with me, Roo Chater. Episode 10 with Gee Atherton. After last week's incredible episode with Alex Jones, I wondered how I was going to follow it up. And as luck would have it, the stars aligned and I found myself at the Kendal Mountain Festival with the opportunity to chat to one of the best downhill mountain bike racers on the planet. Gee Atherton has won 2 World Championships and multiple World Cup overall wins. And he's also just recently won the Red Bull Hardline event in the UK, which is one of the toughest mountain biking events that ever happens on the planet. He's competed at Rampage and got on the podium there. He's had the most incredible career racing mountain bikes, and this year raced in his 100th Downhill World Cup race. And he didn't stop there. He's still carrying on. And as you'll find out in the interview, he's still just as passionate about racing bikes as he was when he first got into it. And he's looking forward to next season already. Gee was a fantastic guest. I'm sure you'll really enjoy this podcast. We talk about a lot of different things, from how he got into bikes and how he discovered bike racing, some of the incredible crashes that he's had and how he's recovered from those, and how he deals with those events both physically and mentally, which I think traverses all sports really, and there's a lot to learn from this one. We also chat about the big events like Rampage and Hardline and how he gets involved with those and the challenges that they offer him, and also the fact that they scare him a little bit too, which is quite an interesting insight. As ever, and I know I say this every week, please share these with your friends, give them a thumbs up on social media, spread them as far and wide as you can, because the more people that are listening to these, then the more I get inspired to keep recording them. And that means there'll be more episodes every week for you to enjoy. I was really honoured to get to chat to Gee. He's a great guy and he's super passionate about racing bikes. And he's incredibly talented as well, but he's very humble with it too. Anyway, let's get into it. I really hope you enjoy this latest episode. Today I'm sat with a gentleman called Gee Atherton. He's a multiple world champion downhill bike racer who's also won numerous World Cup downhill overall titles, and he's just come back from a very good end to his season, winning the Hardline event in Wales, which his brother created a few years back, and also a second place in La Bresse, so a sort of return to form for Gee. We wanted to just get him on the podcast, have a chat with him, because he's had a astounding career, really. Is it 100 World Cup downhill races now?
It was, yeah. This year was Mont Saint Anne in Canada was my 100th downhill mountain bike race.
Which is a huge achievement in that sport. So, Gee, first question for you. Your whole family, you know, your brother and your sister, you're all mad on bikes. How did that start?
Well, it was my older brother, Dan. You know, he has to take responsibility for it, really. You know, it was, we were probably 10 or 11 years old. You know, he was into bikes. I was just kind of milling around, just following my older brother around, doing what he was doing. And, you know, one day at a friend's house, he was like, "Gee, this lad's got a bike for sale, you know, do you want it?" And, you know, he bought me this bike, and from there we would just be out in the woods every day building jumps and drops and gaps. And, you know, we weren't aware that there was a sport and a scene out there. We were just filling our time messing around on bikes. And, you know, from there it advanced. We started kind of riding BMX and then started racing BMX. And then one of the lads kind of turned up with a mountain bike that everyone was amazed by, you know, had a bit of suspension on the back. And, you know, we tried it, decided it was quite cool. And, you know, from there that kind of took us down the mountain bike route.
And so back in the early days, when are we talking about in terms of date-wise, when you started switching to mountain bikes from BMX?
Wow, that was probably, it must have been around the 2000 mark, I'd say.
Okay.
You know, 1999, maybe 2000, we were kind of BMX, bit of mountain biking, on that kind of just riding bikes, you know. Yeah. We had motorbikes, mountain bikes, BMXs. If it had 2 wheels, we'd
be on it,
hit a ramp as fast as we could on it and see how far we could go, you know.
Yeah, and back then there was quite a good scene in the UK for racing and things like that. So do you think having that infrastructure for an event series helped you guys nurture your careers in those early days?
I think so, yeah. You know, we were we were living in the southwest at the time, so we were quite kind of secluded to that area. You know, we would just be racing, but even so, you know, there was like a local southwest series that, you know, we were committed to 100%. We do every round, you know, all around it was just in these tiny little minute and a half tracks pushing up, and you know, we loved it. We would be there every weekend and all through the winter as well, and you know, it was the greatest thing we'd ever done. You know, we'd spend every evening watching the kind of sprung movies from Alex Rankin, and you know, rewinding and pausing and watching sections over and over again. You know, watching Warner, watching Steve Peat, Will Longdon. You know, these were guys that we were just kind of in complete awe of. You know, watching them race and ride, and there was, you know, that's what we wanted to do by then.
Yeah, so it's kind of an all-consuming passion for you guys. You were eating, sleeping, breathing, living it, consuming as much as you could.
So much so, and like looking back on it now, you know, you realise just how much it did take over. You know, we loved it, and you know, Dan was kind of getting to the point where he was, you know, when he started finishing school, you know, a few years after that, he was kind of begrudgingly going to college, but spending every spare minute he had awake on his bike, and you know, it soon got to the point where we started racing slightly bigger races, you know, national series, and you know, doing quite well with it. And you know, once we kind of got a little bit of success and a taste for that kind of that podium, if you like, we started to get a little bit of attention. And you know, the time came when we both managed to win our categories. You know, I was in youth, Dan was in junior. We both managed to win our first national round, and you know, suddenly the phone started ringing a little bit of kind of, you know, what do you do for sponsorship? Could we help you out here and there? And you know, oh my God, that was
made it.
Oh, that was another level. You know, the fact that someone might want to give you a discount on a bike or a free race shirt. You know, we were looking at each other like, wow, what have we stumbled on here? You know.
Yeah, this is incredible. Who was the first kind of bike brand that you started working with seriously?
It was Muddy Fox, actually. Yeah, it was Muddy Fox. You know, we'd had a bit of support from bike shops before that, but you know, it was Muddy Fox were the first people we were like, you know, we're going to sponsor you. Here's a free bike.
Wow.
And we were like, wow, this is, you know, that was incredible, because you know, we'd spent every minute trying to scrape money together. You know, downhill mountain bike is not a cheap sport to get into. You know, it's when you're 15 years old, it's tough to get into. And you know, Dad would help us out, but every time we'd go on the bike, we'd snap something or rip something off, and you know, we'd spend all our time trying to budget back together, trying to mend it. If we had to buy something new, we would kind of scrape together a few quid, and Dad would help us out, and we'd buy it. But you know, once we started getting a little bit of support, that enabled us to take the racing a little bit further. And you know, we started to kind of creep towards that. You know, maybe this is something we could do in the future. Maybe we could try and race abroad a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, this was suddenly a kind of a possibility.
Yeah, a sort of reality that this could become a career, I guess.
Yeah, not at that point. There was still never any kind of, you know, there was still never any question that we would maybe do this professionally as a job. You know, if we kind of thought there might be a chance of us, you know, getting abroad and racing a few World Cups and kind of seeing how we go on at those, that was it, really. You know, there was never a goal from either of us, really. I don't think that we were going to be like, yeah, professionals getting paid to do it, travel the world, do this for our careers. You know, that was way too far away from us. Yeah,
that's quite interesting, because a lot of people are quite, you know, they set these goals and they go after them and they're sort of so driven.
Yeah.
And that's quite interesting to hear that, you know, you've achieved all of that, but in the early days it was just, you know, it still wasn't even on your mind to think that was a possibility.
But I think the difference between a goal and just a dream is, you know, a goal you have to be able to see how it could happen. You have to be able to see the path that you would have to take and the boxes you would have to tick for it to suddenly become a reality. And for me personally, I didn't really dream about that. And I don't think it was until, you know, I was literally like winning World Cups and getting paid as a kind of professional athlete before I was suddenly like, you know, this is actually my job now.
Yeah, this could be
realization hit. You know, this is actually what I'm doing now. And you know, it wasn't until I was really far down the line with it that it kind of suddenly sunk in as to what I kind of got myself into.
Did you have an idea, and this is a weird question, but I'm going to ask, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do before that was? So were you like, I want to be, a policeman or a fireman or anything like that? Did you have a sort of a career that you thought you were going to go down that just never materialised? Or were you just one of these kids that just didn't really know what you wanted to do?
No, I was completely that kid, people, and it surprises people when I tell them this, but, as an athlete, they expect you to be this superhuman, driven, everything mapped out from an early stage, but like planned life. But I was just riding bikes. I had no clue what I wanted to do for a job. I'd planned to go to sixth form after school just because I had nothing better to do. And, I was just choosing the path that meant I had the most free time so I could go and ride my bike, because that's all I love to do. And so, I started riding bikes and racing bikes because there was no other goal in my life, or, there was no other passion. And we were kind of in a van with some friends, a mate mechanicking for us, going off to race World Cups. And even then, still, it was just something we were doing because we loved it, and because we'd grown up watching videos of other people do it.
That's quite interesting, because I guess some people maybe go into these sports with that goal of, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do. And we've done a few podcasts with kite surfers, and I know a few who were like really pushed into like, this is going to be your career, this is your future, this is what you're going to do. And it's interesting to see some of those people, like, they don't have the longevity when they get it, because they're kind of like almost burnt out on it before they get there. Whereas if you've not had that as your goal and then you suddenly have it, it's like, wow, I've got this now. And then you've got that longevity to carry it on, I guess.
Well, I don't think I'd realised, people, it wasn't until people were like, what's it like being a professional athlete? And I was like, why are you asking me that? I just race bikes and sometimes get paid to do it, Ask, I go and ask another guy. And then it wasn't until a few kind of people had mentioned it, and I was like, well, maybe, I guess I am an athlete if you look at it like that. But no, that was never the case. And I'm glad for that, I wouldn't have changed that at all, because, I can't think how it would have felt to be lining up on a start line of my first World Cup at, 17 years old, thinking, right, this is my career on the line, don't blow it. Because, I was some dorky, geeky little kid on a bike that was a bit shonky in my brother's old race kit, racing down the hill, seeing how fast I could go. And when you're that young, there's no better way to get into it, really. You're racing, you have to be racing carefree. You don't want the world on your shoulders. You want to be on the line, taking as many risks as possible, kind of laying everything on the line to show people what you can do. And you don't want to be thinking, right, sponsors are watching, I don't want to blow this is my career, this is my future. They're not thoughts you need in your head when you're 17 years old.
Yeah. And so when you the sort of first big team, I guess, that you were part of was the sort of the major media machine of the Commensal Atherton project that you got into. How did that then change when you're sat at the start line and all of a sudden it is now a job? Was that changing your mindset and you were thinking, I've got to do well, I've got to keep the sponsors happy, or were you still racing kind of carefree and just enjoying it, I guess?
No, I don't think it had changed by then, because we crept into it and it was very organic. It was very natural. It was quite it was a relatively slow process, which gave me the time to learn to deal with it. I wasn't suddenly thrust into this limelight and shocked as to what it was like. I crept. It felt to me like quite slowly. So every race I learned how to deal with a little bit more pressure. I learned how to deal with the media or someone taking a photo of me. I was learning this craft as I went along, and I think that's what you need. And I've seen it now. We've run a professional team for a long time now, and often we'll take a youngster on and, we'll be like, this guy's a great rider, but we're going to give him a mechanic, we'll give him a masseur, he's got a cook, he's got access to anything he wants, he can travel and train anywhere in the world, anything he says, we can supply for him. And you see them racing and they don't do well from it, they don't always, it doesn't help them.
Yeah.
It's too much for them to carry, if you like.
Yeah.
You see people trying to deal with it at races, and their first World Cup on that kind of team with suddenly this massive setup and people asking for their autographs and taking photos with them, and it inevitably it's tough for them to race with that, really. And I'm thankful that I didn't kind of have that when I was young.
Yeah, so you got to organically grow into it rather than being thrust into it.
Yeah,
I guess that's
exactly.
where you've got there's quite a lot of really young talents that come on board these days, and suddenly there's some new kid on the block and they're only 14 or 15 and they're getting big money sponsorship thrown at them, and it's, I guess, because as the sport's grown it's become much bigger in itself, so there's that urge to thrust people to the front of it.
Yeah, I think, like you say, the sport is a lot bigger now. It has grown, and with that, it kind of brings other elements that are, harder to deal with when you're young. But, some riders deal with it better than others, and some riders you see, and it's a shame, because they're amazing talents on a bike, but they struggle to deal with that kind of that race mentality and that pressure of that environment, and you see it work in an adverse effect on them.
You mentioned the team there, and one of the things I think that impresses me about the Atherton brand, I guess, is behind the scenes there are a lot of people making it happen. It's not just you guys turning up to a race and having a go. These days, how different is it from those early days in terms of who you take with you when you go to a World Cup race?
Yeah, it is a big team now, but they're mainly for my sister because she's quite high maintenance. I could still turn up to the World Cup with just my mechanic and have a great weekend, but Rach is there, so we need a chef, we need a masseur, we need a guy who's going to help her with any pressure she might be feeling, someone to take care of the media stuff. But no, I mean, it's it's just down to this kind of, we've raced for a long time, we've been really lucky to be able to run our own team and not always be kind of at the mercy of a commercial sponsor, and that's given us the freedom to kind of learn what makes a good team, what makes a group of athletes that little bit better. And we've learned things over the years that having these extra people at a race, they don't make you race downhill faster. It's not like you're suddenly going to be able to carry more speed through this turn because you've got a masseur waiting for you at the bottom, but it gives you that longevity to be able to have a long, rough race season and get to the end of it in one piece and come back the year after and do it again, and come back the year after and do it again and again and again. And I think that's why me and my sister have been so lucky, because we've had a great team around us, and that is key to being able to come back and succeed in a relatively rough sport.
Yeah, because it takes quite a bit of toll on your body, mountain biking, and if you've got a 6-minute track or something like that, by the time you get to the bottom of it, you're beaten up. One of the big issues, I think, for anyone who rides mountain bikes, and I say this with a bit of knowledge myself because I broke my ankle 3 months ago in the Alps riding, and it's a sport that people said to me, why are you riding so fast? And I don't ride that fast, but they're like, you should slow down. It's like, well, as with mountain biking, the better you get, the faster you go, but you still crash. Even the World Cup winners crash. Everybody crashes a mountain bike. It just depends how you crash and how you fall off. And you've had some belters over the years. Is there any one particular crash that sort of sticks out that either from the resulting injuries were terrible, or just the actual crash itself was the one that you go, that was the gnarliest one I've had?
Yeah, I don't know. Like you say, I've got quite a few to choose from. It's a tough one. I mean, some of the most spectacular crashes, people are like, oh my God, that Rampage crash I saw you have so many years ago, I've watched that video, like, how did you survive that? And I was fine from that. I remember it was a wild crash, and I was just tumbling through the air and rocks and through the dirt, but I was all right, really. And then other crashes, that I've had at a World Cup where you've been belting down the hill and you fly off line and you smash into a tree, and no one's there to see it, and it just beats you to pieces. And they're sometimes the worst ones, but I think they're all unique in their own way, and they're all memorable for certain reasons. I mean, I try and just ignore them and move on from them and don't dwell on them too much, because like you say, everyone crashes a mountain bike. It's what mountain biking is, isn't it? And we do a lot of training and a lot of strength training to kind of give our bodies the best chance, so when we do crash we can hopefully bounce and get back up. But often that doesn't happen, and often you do crash and stay down for a bit. But I guess that comes back to that team of people around you.
Yeah,
the quicker you can get back into circulation and moving and back on a bike and back to that racing, the better. Because every week you spend away from the race circuit is time you're kind of losing that edge and losing that kind of that ability to walk that line, if you like.
And what's your worst injury, do you think, from this sport?
Hard to say. Worst personally is smashing my balls, because that is just miserable.
That video's on the internet, isn't it?
Oh, it is,
I'll
yeah.
add that into the link.
Oh, and it's horrific. And they're the ones where you lay on the floor thinking, why do I do this? But no, I think, obviously the big obvious ones, like the snow crash I had in teens years ago, the crashes I've had at Red Bull Rampage. Last year's crash in Fort William was quite a bad one that put me up for quite a long time, and I was quite, that was one that was personally bad for me because of the kind of the trauma I had after the crash. When you hurt yourself, you crash, you hurt, you're in hospital, you recover, and that was a long period of being injured, being on the floor, getting evacuated off the mountain, being assessed. Like, that period seemed a lot longer than other times, and so it seemed to kind of burn into my memory a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, I dislocated my hip and fractured some vertebrae, knocked myself out, and my hip was out for a long time. My hip was out for 6 hours, and
it's not good.
I was in a bad place, and it was a rough few days. So that seemed to stay with me a little bit longer than other injuries did. But it was just a case of getting back on the bike, plugging away at the racing, and learning to kind of race, ignoring that, if you like. And
yeah,
inevitably, I was I got back up to speed. I had some good results this year, and put it behind me.
Yeah, it must be mentally quite tough. And I'll talk about the physicality of it in a minute. But how do you deal with that kind of downtime off the bike? Because you're very evidently so passionate about riding bikes. So when all of a sudden you're sat in hospital and you're going, I can't ride a bike for 2 months or 3 months or whatever, how do you deal with that time when you can't do the thing that you love?
Well, if I use last year's crash as an example, because that's the most recent, that was a good example of going through every single kind of emotion. Like, I remember it was a race run it happened in, so I remember hitting the jump and getting kicked forward, my ass hit the wheel and I got thrown off the bike. Going through the air, I remember the exact feelings of like thinking, damn, I'm crashing, I remember hitting the floor, like ragdolling, and I knocked myself out. My hip was out of its socket, and I remember standing up and falling back down and, realising what I'd done. And there was a few seconds when I was on the floor to start with, and all I could think of was, bollocks, like I've messed this race run up. I just broke my back, I dislocated my hip, I was semi-conscious, and I was like, I was gutted that I'd blown it, because I felt fast and I was enjoying the weekend, and Fort William was a big one to me. I remember lying on the floor thinking, fuck, I've messed this race run up. And then that kind of subsided as bloody the pain, all took over and whatnot. Then I went to that kind of completely over it, didn't want to race bikes ever again, hated what I'd done to myself. And that's your mind's way of dealing with the injury. You have to tell yourself, I'm not going to ride anymore, I'm not going to do this to myself again, because that's the only way you can cope with it at the time. 2 days later, I'm there trying to persuade the doctor that I will be able to race, in a few weeks, and asking how long till I can get back on the bike. And from that kind of moment, then it was not the easy part, but then you've got a really clear goal. You're like, right, I want to race. And for me, we were mid-season, so I was like, I want to race by the end of the season. The doctors said, that's ridiculous, that's not going to happen, blah blah blah. I was up out of bed after a few more days, testing if I could walk. Quick operation on the hip. They were pleased with the recovery, and from that point it was all about, right, what's the next step? Learning to walk. Right, I can walk. Let's go swimming. Let's try and get back in the gym. Now let's try and ride a bike on the street. And it was just a clear process. When can I race? When can I race? And I 7 weeks later, I raced the World Cup, and it was an incredible. Yeah, it was an incredible feeling to get back on the bike for the second half of that season.
It must have been quite painful when you were racing that World Cup, or were you fairly?
It was painful, but it was more that nervous. The docs were like,
you shouldn't be doing this.
Don't ride a bike. But not only with the saying, don't ride a bike, crashing was completely out of the question. So you try and race a World Cup thinking, don't fall off, don't dab your foot. It's, that was tough. That was really hard. So, it was all about using all my experience to kind of balance that kind of don't crash, but don't trickle down the hill and not qualify. And, you
Yeah.
know, I had an okay result. I was top 30, and I was over the moon to have done it. And you know, it was that kind of, I think it was just that proud part of me wanting to prove doctors wrong. And you know, it was probably a stupid thing to do. I should have just given myself a bit more time off. But for me at the time, it was a real personal thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to race again.
And if it helps you and gives you that goal and satisfaction, then that's almost just as important as listening to the doctors and not doing it.
And a recovery, you know, people are always asking, you know, how can I speed up my recovery? And there's no better way to speed up a recovery than to have a goal. Because every waking moment you're thinking, right, what can I do to make myself be able to reach that goal, you know? And for me, that was a massive drive. Everything I did was like, is this going to help my hip recover so I can race that World Cup? Yes or no? And that was, you know, everything I did, that was the question I was asking myself, you know, that it was always that decision. Is this going to help? Yes or no? If it's not, don't do it. And it worked, you know, I was there.
Awesome. And the other thing I was going to talk about was the physicality of it, which you mentioned before. You know, it is a very brutal sport. In the old days, I remember it was, you know, guys just rocking up to an event, having a few beers, hurtling down the hill, having a laugh, having even more beers afterwards, and then rocking up next weekend and doing the same thing all over again. The sport has changed immeasurably now, and it seems like unless you are an athlete at the peak of your fitness, you haven't really got a look in. So you can't really just turn up and drink beers and have fun anymore. You have to take it seriously. And I think you guys, you know, certainly yourself, you are an incredible athlete. When did that change come, and how did you cope with really starting to, you know, work outside of mountain biking in terms of being fit and strong and weights and, you know, making sure your body was up to what it needed to take?
Well, it was quite early on, really. And, you know, I remember people asking me, you know, as an athlete, how do you deal with the sacrifices of having to go out and train every week? And I remember being a bit confused by the question because, you know, for me and my brother at the time, it was, you know, we weren't looking at it that way around. It was more a case of what can we do to mean we're going to get a little bit faster in the next race. And, you know, that's why we started training, and that's why we started going to the gym, and that's why we started doing sprints and going on road rides, because we could see a direct correlation between being a bit fitter and a bit stronger and, you know, getting a slightly better result the following weekend. And for us, that was you know, why wouldn't we do that? It was all about, you know, how can we go faster? How can we get better race results? And, you know, we realised quite early on there is a clear correlation between, you know, being fit and strong and going fast. So, you know, for us, it was just kind of, it wasn't a question of, is this a sacrifice? Is, you know, it's a bit of a pain to go to the gym. We were there like every minute we could, doing as much as we could, and, you know, we were just like sponges for like learning how, you know, what else can we do. Every time we'd speak to someone who had a bit of experience, you know, we didn't have coaches, but if you would speak to someone, we'd be grilling them, you know, what sprint should we be doing, what weight should we be lifting, you know. What we were doing at the time, looking back, was probably ridiculous. You know, it was, most coaches would be like, you know, what are you doing, you idiots? But at the time, we were training, so that, you know, that was it. That was all we needed to do.
And these days, what's your week look like in terms of training regime? Obviously, it's the off season now, but when you're in the middle of the season, what are you kind of doing around the races to make sure you're fit and ready to go on race day?
Well, it varies a lot, you know, where you are in the season, what's coming up, you know. The off season's kind of, you know, are constantly changing, you know. Even though it's November now, we're still, you know, we're training a bit, we're riding a bit, and, you know, it's all about just kind of not letting yourself drop off too much so your start of the season next year is not too much hard work. But, you know, I try and keep it fun. I try and change things up. You know, I've raced for a long time now, so I can't just grind away at the same weight session. You know, I can't just go into the gym and do the same thing I did last year, because, you know, a routine that works for you last year is not going to work for you again. So it's all about, you know, keeping things fun and fresh and new and exciting, and trying to still learn new techniques. And, you know, I'm a big believer in trying to do that. But at the same time, you know, a huge amount of time on the bikes. It's, you know, that hasn't changed in 10 years. Motorbikes, BMXs, riding the trials bike, riding downhill bike, just always riding. And, you know, I think that's what the sport demands, really. Yeah,
more time in the saddle, the better you're going to be.
I think you need it because, you know, the fitness side is an enormous part of it, but it's not enough. You know, you can't just turn up, you know, as a really good athlete and race down the hill. Your technical side has to be, you know, absolutely incredible. You have to be sharp to be on the bike. You know, if I turn up to a World Cup and I've not ridden for a week, I feel slow and dull, and it takes me ages to get into it. You have to be so sharp when you're going into those World Cups. You get 3 runs and then you're into time training, so you have to be your first run down the hill. You have to turn up ready for action.
You work with quite a lot of brands. The Atherton family has been associated with lots of different brands over the years. Obviously, you've got the bike brands, the accessory brands, the suspension and stuff like that. How involved do you guys get with looking at the design of products and things like that? Do you just ride the stuff they give you, or are you giving the brands the feedback, certainly for the bikes and things like that, as to how you want them to ride?
No, we've always been very involved, and I think that's been a strength of ours for a long time. We've always had that passion to look at the products we're using and work with the companies that are giving us those products and say, how can we improve these? When we're working with a bike company, you don't want to just turn up and get the bike off them, take a check and go and ride the bike. That's not what we're about, and we've never worked with companies that have been into that. We've been quite fortunate to be able to work with people that are kind of as passionate about the racing as we are, and say, look, what can we do to make this bike faster? What can we do to make this product a bit lighter or a bit stronger, make it better at a World Cup? And we've developed a kind of a talent for it over the years. Developing a product, working with engineers, giving them your feedback. We're good at that now, and we have worked with people where it's been quite commercial and they've not always wanted that feedback, and it's always difficult to work with people like that. And inevitably those relationships don't always last that long, because we are passionate about developing things, and if someone just wants you to ride what they've got and do nothing to it seems like a waste, and it's not something we enjoy.
Doesn't hold the interest factor for you guys.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to be refining things. We want to be shaped. Every time you ride a bike, you're like, right, I could change this, I could change that, and refining it and shaping it and turning it into this kind of race machine that's going to give you that half a second extra at the next round.
Do you, when you're sort of working on bikes, are you changing them, physically between each round to make them better and tweaking angles and things like that? Have you got tricks and tips that you can use so that you can change the head angle a little bit, you can make the wheelbase a little bit longer without having to get a whole new prototype sent out from the factory?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. Early season, I'll go away with my mechanic Pete. He's an incredibly gifted engineer, and he's fantastic at being able to look at a bike that I'm riding and say, that's good, but we could try this, we could try that. And he's got a real talent for spotting these things, and it's a complete it's an ongoing process. We never at a point in the season where we're like, right, we're happy, let's leave it at that. We're working with Fox on the suspension, adjusting this, adjusting that, and you change one thing here, and then that means you can change something else somewhere else on the bike. You'll try a slightly different head angle, so your bottom bracket can come up a bit, which means you can run a slight bit extra kind of sag on the suspension, which means your fork has to be a bit firmer here, and that will affect, you can run the wheels slightly looser, lacing on the spokes, which means your tire pressure can go down a bit. It's just everything always constantly changing and evolving and moving and advancing, and you have to be able to stay on top of that. There's a lot of numbers to deal with. There's a lot of data to kind of know what's going on. And as an athlete in the mountain biking sport, that's a big part of it, really.
There's been a lot of changes in the last sort of 10 years with mountain bikes, with wheel sizes and suspension platforms and things like that. As a racer, what do you think is the biggest fundamental change that's helped you go faster?
I think it's the suspension. And it's not been in the media as like, wow, look what's happened. When suddenly everyone went to 29ers or 27s, it was a tangible thing people could see and try and go out and buy and test and really notice a difference. But for me, the suspension, we've been with Fox for a long time, and they've advanced and they've refined this product to the point where every year you're like, right, this is as good as it can get. They're not going to bring anything new out now, but they work with the athletes so close. Their R&D is, it goes into such detail that the following year they've refined it again and given you something even better. And it blows my mind how good it is now. And that's something that's kind of I'd say that's been the biggest change that's allowed riders to push so hard. And it's so good now. It's even to where it was 5 or 6 years ago.
I guess that's the one component that can make it easier on a rider, because we were talking about you get beaten up when you're riding a 6-minute track. If you've got some decent suspension that's working really well, then that takes it out of your arms and out of your legs a little bit, I guess.
I think so, but it's all about just giving you a tool that allows you to push a little bit harder. You're still getting to the bottom of the track battered and beaten to pieces, but it's allowed you to push a little bit further. You've got a bit more traction, so you can hit that turn a little bit faster. And it's probably one of the areas, I guess, the general public know least about. It's hard to get your head around the difference between high-speed compression and low-speed compression, because without an engineer there to explain it to you, it's difficult to understand. But I think it's the area when you kind of start looking into and start working on, one of the areas you can make the most gains, really.
And so 100 races over the years, over 100 now at the end of the season. Is there one that sticks out for you as one that you look back on, and if you could race that race again tomorrow, you'd jump right in and have a go at it again?
Yeah, there's quite a few actually. I think races stand out for different reasons. Obviously, there's been really bad races that have stood out for me where I've thought, God, I'd just love to do that again and change so many things. And then there's others that have stood out because everything's just gone perfectly, and you think, wow, that's just a dream weekend. The first time me and Rach won world champs on the same day, that was something that didn't really sink in for weeks and weeks, until afterwards. And the first time I won in Fort William, in front of a home crowd, and that roar of energy from those guys was, I don't think I'll ever forget that. Winning first time me, Dan and Rachel won on the same day. These are all moments that, when I'm an old man looking back, I'll remember that feeling I had at the time. And then other events, where you've crashed and things have just gone all wrong for you, they stay with you as well. So, I think that's the thing about not just mountain biking but sport in general. It's such a raw, real feeling that it burns itself into you and really stays with you, I think.
There's you obviously had the fantastic win at Hardline this year. And that's an event that's obviously very close to your heart because Dan's been the driving force behind it ever since its inception. What do you think is the biggest difference between something like Hardline and something like Rampage? You've been to both of those events. I mean, we normally, when we talk about Hardline, we're like it's the UK or European version of Rampage. Is it that close of an anomaly, or are they two things that are still poles apart, or do you think they can be talked about in the same sentence?
No, I think there's huge similarities. It's all about just taking a small group of athletes to such a kind of unique environment and kind of pushing them into there and seeing what they can do. It's like a little pressure pot, isn't it? You put in these really talented, gifted athletes and say, right, we're all going to sit back and watch. And what takes place is inevitably amazing to see and always kind of incredible to watch and witness. Rampage is, there's nothing that compares to Rampage because, what the riders are doing there is pushing the limits every year, and it blows my mind still to watch. But, Hardline is similar. It's enormous, it's terrifying, it's putting really gifted, talented athletes into an environment where they're nervous and apprehensive and unsure if they can do it. And, you add that race element to it as well, where they've got to go down this track that the day before they were terrified of even riding, and now they've got to do it as fast as they can, trying to knock tenths of a second off. And then you put a bit of rain in there as well, and it's suddenly you just
it becomes a different animal.
You're thinking, why are the riders all just sat there terrified, thinking, why are we doing this? But they all throw themselves at it. This year was amazing. Every rider there was just committed to it so well, and they pushed so hard, and it was fantastic to see riders really out of their comfort zones, but stepping up to it and dealing with it and kind of and taking it on.
And you've allowed more people to come and watch the event now, haven't you? Because the first event, I think, was sort of run under a sort of quite a low-key affair with a few select media invitees, and then it went out. Whereas this year there was, a few thousand people there. How's that changed the vibe of the event?
It's cool. I'd love to see more people there. Obviously, you're dealing with the constraints of a Welsh hillside, so it's tricky to kind of get that many people up there. But the first year was different. No one knew what was going to happen. No one knew what the event was going to, how it would work out. And a lot of people got hurt that first year. We lost like 50% of the riders were injured. So we was lucky not many people were there. But now the event's kind of settled in a bit. You know what's going to happen, and people come along to watch, and they're always it's amazing to see their reactions. People just kind of stood with their mouths open watching you jump off this cliff and land somewhere else, and it blows their minds, and that's quite a cool thing to see, really.
Is there any sort of jumps or drops or features at some of these events where you've rocked up and just gone, oh my god, I don't want to throw myself off that?
Yes. Definitely. We were there testing. We had to go up to Hardline to test all the jumps a few weeks before the event, and that was quite an intimidating thing to do, because you turn up, there's no fanfare to it. There's no cameras, there's no lights, there's no crowds and spectators. It's you and a couple of other lads riding, a few paramedics to keep an eye on you, and a couple of course builders. It's quite a low-key event, but you have to test all these jumps and try, see if they work. Which is, you're coming down this forest as fast as you can go and hitting this jump that no one's ever hit before, and the only gauge you've got is your skills as a rider. How fast do I hit this? And a miscalculation either way, too short or too far, is going to cost you serious injury. And you've got 15, 20 obstacles that you've got to tackle down this mountainside, and it's just me and my brother working our way down, testing jump after jump, and
hitting at right speed to make that takeoff and landing perfect.
And everything has to be perfect. You can't say, I came up a bit short on that, but it's all right. You come up a bit short on a 70-foot gap, you're gonna lose both ankles. And there's just jump after jump and drop after drop, and each one has to link into the next one perfectly. And there's definitely times where you're at the top of that mountain thinking, I'm not enjoying myself here.
And I guess Dan, your brother, he's the guy that creates that event and puts the jumps in and stuff like that. You must have a fair bit of faith that when you rock up and you see a 70-foot gap and you're like, really? But are you thinking, oh, Dan's done it, so it'll be okay?
Yeah, definitely. And he's the reason why I'm happy to go along and test something like that, because if someone else had built it, I wouldn't have that faith. I wouldn't have that trust in them. I'd say, why do you think if I land on this jump on the landing perfectly and then put 2 cranks in, that I'm going to have enough speed to clear this this next 70-foot gap? But because Dan says that's true, I trust it, and inevitably it is right.
Yeah.
There have been times where he's had a bit of a miscalculation and I've tested something and it's gone horribly wrong, or he's tried it and he's bust himself up. But the majority of the time, he knows my riding well enough, and I trust his building enough that we can work so well together. And when we're up there testing jumps, that bond that we have is what kind of it allows us to kind of work so well together.
You must have an incredible amount of faith in each other, I guess. Like his faith in your abilities and your faith in his abilities.
Yeah,
stuff.
We have, but it does waver. We'll be there both on the bikes at the top of the run-in, thinking, right, that's a bloody big jump. And he's confident when he's there building it, but then suddenly when we're kitted up, helmets on it's time to do it, we're both suddenly like, do you think we're going fast enough? And these questions come, niggling into your mind. But inevitably, you just have to. I trust what he does. He's a very talented, not only builder but rider as well, and he knows what he's doing, and that allows him to build an event like Hardline and build it with such precision, and allow him to create obstacles that the riders are, making inch perfect.
Have you got any interest to go back to Rampage after winning Hardline this year?
I have, yeah. I've got a huge respect for Rampage as an event, and I was out there this year watching and doing some filming, and it gave me this. It really made me want to do it again. Yeah, I would love to be back there. If I could, I don't know. I would love to be there. It's an amazing event, and I've done it quite a few times, and I've got this kind of, it's a long-term love affair with that place.
It's a beautiful spot, isn't it?
It's incredible, yeah, and it's such a unique place. And when I get out there, I get it gives you the shivers. You're like, you're back at Rampage, and there's nowhere else like it in the world. And being back watching this year, those guys all up there building and riding and trying their lines, it made me want to do it again. And I've got such a passion for that event. It's absolutely incredible.
You've obviously ridden your mountain bike in probably some of the most incredible places in the world, and you've been to some of the best tracks and ridden the best spots. If you could only ride your mountain bike in one area for the rest of your life, where would you pick?
Oh, wow. Well, I'd have to say the local trails around where I live, because they're built by guys that we ride with every day. They're absolutely amazing to ride. They're terrifying. They're wet and slippy and absolutely, some of the hardest trails to ride. But I can go out week after week and ride them, and they're constantly changing, and they're still a challenge for me after all these years. So, for me, that's what I enjoy riding, and I think anything that's going to make me feel like I don't know what I'm doing and make it a real struggle is something I'm passionate about.
Keep you interested and
it keeps me sharp.
It. Yeah, that's good. And you've obviously had this huge, long career. Everyone's always asking, what's next? You obviously come across very passionate still about racing. Is that still your main focus at the moment?
It is, yeah. The racing is it's what I love, and it's still 100% the main goal for me. We've got a project coming next year that I'm very excited about. I can't say much about it at this point, but it won't be long until we kind of have some news on it, and that takes into account a few different areas of what we do and combines them with the racing and the technology side and the development stuff we've done, and it bottles it all into one. And it's a project I'm so excited about, nervous about, but really looking forward to showing everyone what we're doing.
And do you think next year you're going to, have you got a feeling as to how you're going to be able to carry on? You did well at the Bresse. Do you think you could be podiuming again throughout next World Cup season?
Yeah, definitely.
That is the goal?
That is the goal. And, finishing a season on a high and kind of climbing is an amazing feeling, but you get to the end of the season, you're like, what next? I want more, and suddenly there's no races. But it means you go into the off-season buzzing for it. It means you're, rather than like wanting time off and time to chill, you're counting down the days to when you start training and you're riding and you're loving it, and it means you go into the next season with that fire still burning and looking forward to racing again, and that's where I'm at right now. Perfect.
And a couple of last questions for you. For someone listening to this, it's obviously, some of the guests we have on there have these incredible lives, and they're living the dream, I guess, of what a lot of kids will be listening to, or even adults are just thinking, I'd love to race bikes professionally and travel the world and go to all these amazing events and do all this cool stuff. But obviously it's not all sunshine and roses. What's the hardest thing about being Gee Atherton, do you think?
I think it's forcing yourself to do the things you don't want to do. I think what I do is amazing when you're enjoying it, when you're loving it, but suddenly when you have to race or travel, when you're injured or you're not feeling it, or you're sore from a crash, and you have to push yourself through it. Sometimes they're the times you think, this is a pain in the ass, and this I could be doing something I enjoy more. But I still say to this day, we're very lucky about what we do, and I think you get that with any job, and the injuries are kind of a small downside to otherwise an amazing sport.
Perfect. That's a really nice answer. I like the fact that you're sort of still so passionate about it all, but also you can recognise the negative sides of it, but they're far outweighed by the positives of what you get up to.
Yeah, there's small downsides to everything, isn't there? But as long as, like you say, as long as the positives outweigh the negatives, then you're obviously onto a good thing, I think.
Excellent. Awesome. Gee, I think that's a really nice spot to end it there.
Okay, cool.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Hey, my pleasure. No worries.
There we have it. Episode 10 in the bag. Double figures. Please, 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 if you enjoyed this episode, then share it with your friends. I know I say this every week and you're probably getting bored of me saying it, but it does make a difference, and it was really great to see the numbers take a little bit of a jump after the last couple of episodes. So if you're enjoying these, share them with your friends, put them on social media, tell people about them down the pub, and get listening, because it just inspires me to make more. I'll be back next week with another episode of Intriguing Beings with me, Ruchater.